In this episode, we're going to learn how to choose sources the way a careful intelligence analyst would, meaning you will learn how to pursue information that increases confidence and relevance while avoiding information that feels interesting but adds little value. Beginners often think source selection is mainly about finding as many sources as possible, but volume is not the same as quality, and more inputs can actually make you less accurate if those inputs are unreliable or redundant. The real skill is recognizing which sources are likely to answer your requirement, which sources can be validated, and which sources will mislead you by mixing opinion with facts or repeating unverified claims. When you can pick high-value sources quickly, your analysis becomes faster and more defensible because you spend time on evidence rather than on chatter. This also matters for the exam, because many questions quietly test whether you understand credibility, bias, and relevance, not just whether you can name types of sources. The goal is to build a mental filter that helps you skip noise without missing what matters. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first step in picking high-value sources is to anchor yourself on the intelligence requirement, because a source is only valuable in relation to a question. A source can be credible and still be low value if it does not help answer the requirement, and a source can be imperfect but still be useful if it provides a unique perspective that can be validated. Beginners often start with the source and then search for a question it might answer. But the better approach is to start with the question and then seek sources that can plausibly reduce uncertainty for that question. For example, if the requirement is about whether a specific technology is being exploited in the wild, you want sources that provide evidence of exploitation, not just speculation. If the requirement is about whether an adversary is targeting your industry, you want sources that explain targeting patterns with supporting data, not just dramatic language. This requirement-first mindset prevents busy work because it gives you permission to ignore content that does not move the decision forward. It also makes you more confident in your choices because you can explain why each source belongs in your analysis. High-value sources tend to share a few traits that beginners can learn to spot. They are transparent about what they observed, they separate facts from interpretation, and they provide enough detail that someone else could verify or challenge the claims. They also show consistency over time, meaning the source has a track record of being corrected when wrong and of updating assessments as new evidence appears. Another trait is specificity with context, where the source provides concrete observations but also explains what those observations do and do not mean. A low-value source, in contrast, tends to rely on vague claims, sensational language, and recycled content that is hard to trace back to original evidence. The difference is not just professionalism, it is verifiability. In intelligence, verifiability is a form of quality because it lets you build confidence by comparing multiple independent observations. A critical concept for source selection is primary versus secondary information, because many noise problems come from people repeating each other without adding new evidence. A primary source is closer to the original observation, like a report that includes direct telemetry, first-hand incident findings, or clearly documented research methods. A secondary source is commentary or aggregation, where someone summarizes what others said, often without adding new verification. Secondary sources can be useful for awareness, but they are risky if you treat them as evidence. Beginners sometimes get trapped in a loop where they read 10 articles that all say the same thing, but all 10 are based on the same initial claim that might be weak. A better approach is to ask where the claim came from and to seek the most direct available source. Even if you still use secondary sources, you treat them as pointers rather than proof. This is how you reduce the chance of building an assessment on an echo chamber. Bias is another unavoidable factor, and learning to handle bias responsibly is part of choosing high-value sources. Bias does not always mean dishonesty. It can simply mean a consistent perspective shaped by incentives, goals, or limited visibility. A vendor might emphasize threats that align with what they sell, a researcher might emphasize what is novel, and a community forum might emphasize what is emotionally compelling. Your job is not to reject everything that might have bias, because all humans have bias, but to recognize how bias might shape what the source highlights and what it downplays. High-value intelligence work compares perspectives and looks for corroboration, especially for claims that would drive significant decisions. If a claim appears only in one place and cannot be verified, your confidence should remain low. If multiple independent sources with different incentives report consistent observations, confidence can increase. This is not cynicism. It is disciplined reasoning. Relevance is the filter that keeps you from drowning, and it is different from credibility. Credibility asks whether a source tends to be accurate and evidence-based, while relevance asks whether the content actually matters to your requirement and your environment. A credible report about a threat targeting a different industry with a different technology stack may be interesting, but it may not change what you need to do. A credible report about a vulnerability that is being exploited may still be irrelevant if your environment does not use the affected system or if exposure is mitigated in a way that makes exploitation unlikely. Beginners sometimes treat relevance as an afterthought, but relevance is the core of intelligence because intelligence is meant to support decisions. A high-value source is one that is both credible and relevant, or at least one that adds unique context that helps you decide whether something is relevant. If a source does not change your understanding of risk or priority, it is probably noise for your current requirement. It also helps to separate external sources from internal sources, because internal telemetry is often the most relevant source in the world for your specific organization. External sources can tell you what is happening broadly, what techniques are trending, and what campaigns might be active, but they cannot tell you what is happening inside your own environment. Internal sources like logs, alerts, asset context, and incident notes can reveal whether a threat is present, whether exposure exists, and what normal activity looks like for your systems. Beginners sometimes over-rely on external reporting because it feels authoritative, but the most useful intelligence often comes from connecting external context to internal reality. A high-value source selection approach often combines both: external sources to inform what to watch for, and internal sources to validate and prioritize. This combination also helps you avoid overreacting to headlines, because you can test relevance against your own data. When you learn to treat internal telemetry as a first-class intelligence source, your assessments become more grounded. Another important idea is timeliness, because some kinds of information decay quickly, while others remain useful over longer periods. Tactical details can become stale fast as adversaries rotate infrastructure and change tools, so you need to be careful about using older details as if they are current. Broader patterns and strategic trends often remain useful longer, but even they can shift when technologies, geopolitical conditions, or attacker incentives change. The high-value move is to match the freshness of the source to the kind of intelligence you are producing. If you are making near-term defensive decisions, you want the most current evidence you can reasonably validate. If you are making longer-term risk assessments, you want sources that show stable patterns and that explain how those patterns were observed. Beginners sometimes treat an old but polished report as more valuable than a current but rougher signal. But value depends on the decision and time frame. Good source selection is about fit, not about appearance. To skip noise effectively, you also want to learn the difference between unique value and repeated value, because repeated value is where time disappears. If 5 sources all repeat the same claim with no new evidence, reading all 5 is usually noise for analysis. If one source provides a unique data set, a first-hand observation, or a clear method, that source is high value because it increases your ability to reason defensively. If another source provides a different viewpoint, like a different region, a different industry, or a different incentive structure, that can also be high value because it helps you test whether a claim holds across contexts. The trick is to avoid confusing repetition with corroboration. Corroboration requires independent observation or independent evidence, not just independent writing. When you train yourself to ask what new evidence does this source add, you become very fast at skipping noise. A common beginner pitfall is treating confidence as something that comes from strong language rather than from strong evidence. Some sources sound confident because they use definitive statements, but confidence in intelligence should be earned through clarity of observation, validation, and consistency. A high-value source often includes caveats, alternative explanations, and a clear separation between what is known and what is assessed. That can sound less dramatic, but it is often more trustworthy. When you see a source that is heavy on certainty and light on evidence, your skeptical filter should activate. This does not mean you throw it away instantly. It means you downgrade confidence until you can validate. The exam often tests this by offering answer choices that reward evidence-based confidence rather than emotional certainty. Learning this distinction improves both your study outcomes and your real-world thinking. To close, picking high-value sources is about disciplined alignment to requirements, evidence quality, and relevance to the decision you are supporting. High-value sources tend to be transparent, verifiable, and clear about the difference between observation and interpretation, while low-value sources tend to be vague, sensational, or repetitive without adding evidence. A strong approach favors primary observations when possible, accounts for bias rather than pretending it does not exist, and uses corroboration correctly by seeking independent evidence. It also treats internal telemetry as a powerful source of relevance and uses timeliness as a fit factor based on the intelligence level you need. When you practice asking what new evidence does this source add and how does it change the decision, you become fast at skipping noise without becoming careless. That speed is not a shortcut. It is the result of clarity about what intelligence is supposed to do, which is to reduce uncertainty in a defensible way so people can act.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.